How have other people been surviving at the end of the world? Welcome to the Complete Story Series, where I take trade paperbacks and single issues and I break them down into digestible bites to help you understand. Then I read it dramatically back to you. All alterations to the panel, text, and images are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by its respective companies. Last time, we discovered that Rick and his group now had an entire series of communities linked together, and they were now building their new lives. So what new horrors wait for them in the world of The Walking Dead? At the end of our last chapter, Magna and her group were waiting for Andrea to return home so that they could get the answers that they wanted. What secret was this place hiding? It seemed too good to be true for them to just arrive and have a beautiful place to hide away from the walkers. But as time passed in the home, everyone just ended up sitting around talking, and Andrea explains how things have been since Rick took over. They talk through the night, and Andrea begins to ask if anyone wants coffee, but before she can go make the coffee, there's a knock at her door. Andrea opens it up to see Paul, also known as Jesus, and he just wanted to check on Andrea, but she tells him everything's fine, and she's getting to know the new visitors. Over in Hilltop, Rick and Carl say their goodbyes as Rick finally begins to head home. It'll be a long journey. But elsewhere, Dante, the leader of the scout group that went looking for Ken ever since he went missing, sits with a walker holding a shotgun to the back of his head. Something the walkers should not be capable of. Dante asks him, please, don't shoot him, and the walker tells him, keep your voice down, more will come. Dante asks him, how many of you are there? And the walker tells him, many, and your group came into our land and killed our kind. So now, we will explore your lands, and you will know us. You will fear us. Back at the town, Jesus goes to talk with Darius when he finds out that Nathaniel, another patrolman, has yet to come back and even check in. So, Darius decides to go out and look for Nathaniel, and Jesus decides to ride with him. As the group begins to travel, Darius mentions that Nathaniel would sometimes go into the uncharted areas looking for trinkets and such, and Jesus tells them that they just need to keep riding. But behind them, a few walkers have begun to follow them, and some of them are covered in stitches, like the ones that Dante ran into, and the ones that are now talking. As the group continues to ride, they get further into the uncharted areas, and Jesus decides they need to turn back now. But before leaving, one of the walkers following them runs in and stabs Darius. Jesus watches and tells the others that they are with that they need to go, but then he sees them too stabbed, and they're brought down off their horses. Jesus gets ready to fight, but that's when one of the walkers gets close and he whispers, "You will now die." The walker lunges in for an attack, and Jesus manages to bring him down, but it's a short-won victory because the others begin to surround him. He asks what they are, and the walkers respond, telling him, "We are the Whisperers, and right now, you are somewhere you don't belong." Jesus begins to fight back, but during the struggle, the horse gets scared and it starts to run off, and that's when Jesus hears someone call for help. He turns back to see Darius still alive, but the walkers are now starting to crawl towards him. He runs over and kicks the walkers before they could get to him, but that's when more of them begin to gang up, and after Jesus kills one, he begins to hear one of the Whisperers calling a name, Joshua. Jesus continues to kill the rest of the walkers and the Whisperers, but before he can bring his sword down on the very last one, the Whisperer asks him, "Please don't kill me," and Jesus stops, holding the sword up. Back at Hilltop, Carl sits with Sophia Green, and the two talk about how things used to be. But as the two talk and everything is fine, some boys that Sophia stopped earlier from picking on somebody run up from behind and hit Carl in the back of the head with a brick. He gets up and he runs off, and that's when one of the boys grabs Sophia, and he holds her in place while the others begin to beat on her. They keep kicking her until a shadow appears behind the boys, and one of them is cracked in the back of the head with a shovel by Carl. Carl turns to the other ones, and the boy tells Carl, "No, don't! But Carl, without saying a word, hits him and continues to beat on the boys repeatedly with the shovel. Soon, out in front of Hilltop, Jesus comes riding in calling for a doctor, and the townsmen run over to take Darius away, and they notice a prisoner. Maggie Green runs up to see what's going on, and also sees that Jesus brought someone back, but before she can even ask about it, she hears Sophia call out to her. Maggie runs over to see Carl helping Sophia limp to them, and Carl tells them that the boys attacked them, and he thinks he may have killed them. Later, the doctor, Alex, looks over Sophia and tells Maggie that she did take a beating, but she'll be okay. And shortly after that, the parents of the boys that Carl beat with the shovel storm in carrying their children, stating that Carl tried to murder them. Carl tries to say that he was defending Sophia, but the parents continue to yell at him, stating that it was Carl who attacked the boys. The father of the boys tells Maggie that Carl needs to get locked up, and he needs to apologize, but Carl tells them no, they attacked Sophia. Maggie tells the father to just go home now. Carl's gonna be punished, so for now, Carl will wait in the holding cells. While Maggie takes Carl down for holding, Jesus interrogates the young girl that was pretending to be a walker that he brought back with him. Jesus asks her, why did the Whisperers attack them, and the girl looks over to see Carl, and the two's eyes meet. Maggie tells Carl to trust her for now, All he needs to do is wait here. This is for his protection. Maggie begins to leave and sees how things are going with the interrogation, and that's when she notices Jesus holding a mask made out of skin. He tells Maggie that these people use these to keep the walkers from attacking them, and they thought that they were just normal walkers until they started talking. Maggie grabs Jesus and tells her that they need to talk and they can't do it in front of the girl, so they leave the girl there locked up. But seeing them bring Carl in, the girl goes to the other side of the wall to ask if he did something. He doesn't respond, so the girl tells him her name is Lydia. What's his? He sits in silence for a moment and then he tells her his name is Carl, and Lydia smiles. Back at the boy's parents' house that Carl beat, the parents begin to talk about how Carl needs to go, but because Maggie survived with Carl and his family, she won't just put him out. And from the corner of the room, Gregory tells them that if that's the case, why don't they just kill Maggie? Back in the holding cells, Carl and Lydia begin to talk about the reasons that they were locked up, and Lydia asks why they would lock up Carl if he was defending someone. Carl tells her that they don't kill people anymore and he almost did, and Lydia tells him that he helped have some of her people killed. Over in the medical building, Sophia begins to wake up and Maggie sits by her bedside greeting her. She leans in close and asks Sophia to tell her exactly what happened, and after hearing what happened, Maggie goes down to the holding cells to release Carl. But outside of Hilltop, the Whisperers begin to gather because they realize this is where they took Lydia. As time goes on, Carl begins to sit outside of Lydia's cell, and they begin to talk and build a friendship. However, one day there's a knock on Gregory's door and it's the boy's father. He tells Gregory that he's been thinking and he's on board with his plan. Later, the boy's parents go to confront Maggie for releasing Carl, but as the mother and Maggie begin to get into an argument, Gregory breaks them up and he asks if he can speak with Maggie alone for a moment. He tells her that, look, with everything going on, maybe they should just sit down later and talk about things. And Maggie agrees it's the best course of action. After Maggie's running with Gregory, she steps outside to run into Jesus, who tells her that Lydia isn't talking much anymore, so Maggie comes up with an idea and goes to see Carl. Shortly after that, Lydia is sitting in her cell and the door finally opens and Carl walks in. He tells her that he's letting her out, but she'll have to be nice, and if she steps out of line, he'll kill her himself. So Lydia promises that she'll behave. Maggie heads over to talk to Gregory, and when she steps into his home, he offers her a drink, and while her back is turned, he begins to pour some powder into her drink. They sit down and they begin to talk about Carl, but soon Maggie begins to feel woozy. Gregory comments about how that's rather odd. Once she realizes that she's been poisoned, Gregory begins to gloat, and as Jesus was coming by to check on Maggie, he overhears the gloating. He runs in, kicking Gregory down, and Gregory hits his face on the ledge, breaking his nose. He then goes to check on Maggie, and she's barely breathing. Jesus tells Gregory that if Maggie dies, he's going to kill him. But Maggie begins to shake off the drug and tell Jesus that no one's going to be killing anyone, and tells Jesus to lock up Gregory. Outside, Lydia and Carl begin to talk about Lydia's past before all of this, and she tells him that she's from a tribe which basically has the mentality of animals, and some of the men would force themselves on her. Lydia goes on to tell him that she doesn't want to go back to that, and Carl tells her not to worry, he won't let that happen. Back at the holding cells, after Maggie and Jesus locked up Gregory, Oscar comes running in to tell them that they need to come quick. Something is happening out front right now. After a short amount of time, Maggie walks out to the front of the town to see a group of Whisperers, and the leader of the Whisperers tells Maggie that they don't want any conflict, and the leader begins to take off her hood. She tells Maggie, "My name is Alpha, and we only want one thing from you, my daughter." Maggie says that her daughter was a part of the group that killed some of their people, and Alpha tells her that the men were intruding on the Whisperers' land. But besides that, what have they done to Lydia? Maggie says Lydia was not harmed, and Alpha says, well, neither were their men. Behind Alpha is Dante and Ken walking up. Dante tells Maggie how much he missed her, and Alpha suggests a trade. They're meant for Lydia. Maggie says to give them a few minutes to discuss it. Back inside, Carl tries to defend Lydia, telling Maggie that Lydia doesn't want to go back at them, but Lydia's the one that steps up and tells them that she'll do it, she'll go back. She tells Carl that she liked it here, spending time with him, but she does miss her people. And after a short amount of time, outside of the gates, everyone watches as Lydia walks away with Alpha. Back inside, Carl argues that they shouldn't have let Lydia go. Lydia was a victim, and those people will go back to treating her poorly. But Maggie tells him that she won't deal with this right now. She has other things that she needs to check on. She goes over to check on Dante and Marco in the doctor's office. And while the doctor says that they both seem to be in perfect health, Dante tells Maggie that he's flattered that she would come and check on him. But he goes on to state that he doesn't really know what happened. Ken and him were in the tent for most of the time and blindfolded. And Ken mentions that they first thought the Whisperers were cannibals, but they did feed them meat that was like rabbit and venison. Dante adds that they need not cross that group's path again. He didn't see much, but he heard them. There were a lot. It sounded like there were 1,000 of them. As Sophia is finally able to begin walking around, she goes to see Carl because her mom told her that he seemed upset about releasing Lydia. When she knocks on his door, she doesn't get an answer. And when she opens his door, she is shocked to find no one there. Because outside of the settlement, in a field, Carl stands there looking out in the direction that Lydia went. You guys asked for Walking Dead, so we brought you more Walking Dead, and we're gonna try to make it more of a regular thing, so don't worry, it won't be like a 2-month break to the next chapter this time. Hope you guys are enjoying this, and let me know your theories about the Whisperers down below. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Comicstorian and Instagram at Comicstorian, and I'll see you guys next time right here.